I'll tell you what this rule change scuffle is evidence of, Amy. I think it's evidence of three things. First of all, when you ask about disunity, yes, there is some element of disunity when it comes to the Paulinites, the Ron Paul fans, okay? When I walked into the convention center tonight, past security, which you go through, you know, chain link fences and Secret Service guards, and you go through a metal detector eventually, there are Ron Paul fans out front, and they, with their signs, were chanting, "Remember, you're not bound." They're talking to delegates. They're trying to remind delegates of how they view these rules. So there is disunity, and as you talked about, Amy, Ron Paul said he is going to fall short of a full endorsement of Mitt Romney, that it would undo 30 years of what he's been fighting for. So that's number one. It is evidence of disunity when it comes to Ron Paul fans. Number two, it's evidence of this. The delegate strategy, and this is about strategy, that Ron Paul attempted to put into play. That is, where you don't necessarily win the primaries in the states, but you win the election of delegates that end up showing up here and casting votes. That strategy, the Republican Party is not very excited about and doesn't want to see return. They don't want this insurgent presidential campaign done under a primary process by the election of delegates. Third, I'll say this. This is what it's evidence of. And if it's anything larger than how it applies to Ron Paul. When I was on the convention floor yesterday, we do have pictures of some of the things I saw when it came to the Ron Paul fans, but I did go talk to some of the delegates, specifically the Texas delegation. They're easy to find. They have the cowboy hats on, all of them. And I asked them, you know, what do you think? Are you excited about Mitt Romney? Are you coalescing behind Mitt Romney? And I heard this tension regarding these rules and a sense of this being repeated over and over. The establishment's not going to do this. They're not going to pick the candidate. And a projection of that whole debate we had regarding the establishment, SE onto Mitt Romney, onto the Republican Party, and kind of feeling like some of these grassroots people had been frozen out.
So yeah, I saw that as well. But I also, when I spent some time over at on the floor today, and I was actually on the floor for that vote. But when I spent some time over there, I was talking to some RNC folks and some committee members, and the sense there was, once again, it's all about Ron Paul, and Ron Paul is looking out for Ron Paul. And frankly, coming out to say that you're not going to give the president who is being nominated right now your full support, I think will not get as favorable a reception across the country as it has perhaps in this hall. But I think what's interesting to point out is I don't think you were in 2008. Were you in Minnesota?
I was, as a fan.
As a fan,
spectator.
Right. Well, I was there working, and Ron Paul had his own separate convention right outside the main convention in Minnesota. And it accomplished a number of things. It was sort of this other convention that was going on. So there were a lot of protests around it, and there were a lot of excited young people, and it got a lot of comparison and contrast between the actual RNC for all of the energy and the young people over with Ron Paul. Tucker Carlson introduced Ron Paul. But keeping them separate almost gave them an outlet. Here, everyone's integrated, so there's a lot of frustration for these Ron Paul fans, and I'm sure for Ron Paul himself, that they're not getting the airplay and the time that they want, whereas they had a whole stage to themselves last time. So I think some of that is what you're seeing, and these are people who do not want to let go of their excitement around Ron Paul. They just don't want to move on.
The base,
Buck, what are your thoughts?
Well, there are a few things. One is look, I can see from this is not helpful. I think everyone agrees it's not helpful for them to be causing problems, but it's also not particularly damaging. We've already seen this. This is not going to be an issue anymore. Rand Paul, who is speaking, who has given his full support to Mitt Romney, he's the next generation of libertarians. He is Ron Paul 2.0, if you will, in more ways than one. And so I really think that what you're seeing here is they're trying to stay true to the ideas. Ron Paul is on the way out. For him to cave at this point in his career, he would view as, look, I'm selling out. That's not helpful because we do want to change the trajectory of this country. That said, if he didn't have Rand there to sort of pick up the slack and say, look, Barack Obama winning is the worst possible outcome for a libertarian, by the way, then I would see this as sort of more disruptive. I wish they hadn't done this, but I do think that it's very much mitigated by the fact that you have Rand Paul throwing very direct support behind Mitt Romney, speaking. I think he's going to give an exceptional speech, and I think that it is important. Look, if the Republican Party is a party of ideas, not disparate interests coming together to get what they can from the government like the Democrats, then we need to see it as such, and that means there's going to be some infighting sometimes.
But I think you're also going to see in the future, this really actually, from my perspective, is a bad thing because it makes politics more boring. You're not going to see 1976 ever happen again. And I think that essentially what we see in this is a situation where, I mean, representative government represents. And in this case, the people of the Republican Party chose Mitt Romney, and he's going to have a much more significant mark if he's elected as president on the party for the foreseeable future, thanks to the changes that they've made today.
Yeah, so what's ironic, though, is that I think the party advocated these changes to ensure that the convention stayed about Mitt Romney, and that we wouldn't do what we're doing right now, talking about Ron Paul. So in fact, a lot of these Ron Paul supporters are getting what they want, which is to make sure that the things that they care about are at least given some airtime. And so it's just kind of ironic because they still got that, even with the rule change.
I also believe most of them. I know they say that they won't vote for Mitt Romney, that they're sort of the last holdouts. There are a lot of people who, during the primaries, are saying, well, if Rick Santorum doesn't win, I'm not even sure. Mitt Romney is a rhino, whatever. That tone has changed dramatically. I think a lot of the Ron Paul supporters will say Barack Obama is the worst of these two options. We have to go with Mitt Romney.
But also the Republican Party has given in two planks, right? So one is that they're going to audit the Fed and perhaps set up a commission to consider the gold standard. These kinds of things are concessions that can placate these supporters without having Ron Paul be the nominee.
So I want to bring our Will and SE reporters on the ground back into the conversation. Will, by passing the torch to Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, speaking at the convention, does this mean that the Ron Paul movement, as this outside movement, is literally being brought into the tent, that they're going mainstream and becoming the new establishment?
No. I don't think I can go as far as you just went, Amy. I do think this. I think that Ron Paul and now Rand Paul have been hugely influential on the Republican Party. I think Emily and Ben and Buck were just talking about some of the libertarian-themed planks that are making their way into the Republican Party platform. You can't really understate how influential they've been, but it's not really from inside the tent. I understand his title is Senator Rand Paul, right? But this is an outside influence. These are ideologies and positions that are coming from non-traditional sources. And I mean, Rand Paul was advocating for these things long before he was senator of Kentucky, and Ron Paul is certainly an outside influence. What I'm telling you is this, is that you can't underestimate the influence they're having, but I don't think we can call it inside the tent or insider mainstream Republican Party.
Well, and I think there's a real